Before today's proceedings continue, here's a brief recap of one of Colorado's most heartbreaking criminal cases. On January 27, 2020, 11-year-old Gannon Stauch disappeared from his home in Colorado Springs, Colorado. His stepmother, Letecia Stauch, initially claimed he had left the house and never returned. As the investigation unfolded, detectives uncovered evidence that contradicted her statements. Letecia was later arrested and charged with Gannon's murder. This trial took place in El Paso County, Colorado in 2023. In this second part, the prosecution continues presenting its closing arguments before the jury begins deliberations.
The one thing they cannot answer, because there is no answer, is motive. Motive for why this happened. Motive how we can go from this picture on a hike up at Garden of the Gods, loving, kind, to less than 24 hours later. Brutal rage, 18 stab wounds, 4 blunt force trauma, shot. This wasn't a pre-planned, calculated killing for some gain. This was a psychotic break fueled by rage, attacking a demon from the past. They cannot come up with a motive because there is no motive that makes sense, ladies and gentlemen. They have tried. They have spent hundreds, if not thousands of hours trying to come up with one. They have gone through phones. They have gone through iCloud accounts. They have gone through Facebook messages. They've interviewed everybody who they could possibly think of to try to find some motive. None of what they have done in this, the biggest investigation in the history of El Paso County, has come up with a motive. No one who they have ever interviewed has ever said that she ever had a problem with Gannon. No one who they have ever interviewed has ever said she was ever mean to Gannon. No one who they've ever interviewed or come across anything has said she's ever done anything wrong to Gannon until that horrible day when this happens. That is the evidence, and the most strong evidence to know this was not premeditated murder. This was a psychotic break. That is the only thing that makes sense. And when you can pull yourself back and peel back the layers of the anger over the act, at the anger over the deceit in which it happened, at the anger over Gannon's body being driven all the way to Florida, when we take those emotions back and we try to look at this rationally, the only thing that possibly makes sense is a psychotic break. There is no other rational explanation to understand why this happened other than that. He was a special needs teacher, elementary needs teacher. That's what she'd been her entire life, working with kids with special needs. She was a mother to Harley, did everything she possibly could for Harley. She was a wife to Al. She was tried to be the best stepmother she could be these kids. So much so that she was left with the kids for very long periods of time. In the months preceding this, when Al had gone up to Alaska, he had left his 2 kids in her care. He was gone. We were about as far across the country as you could possibly get. And based upon his relationship with her, based upon him seeing her as a loving stepmom, felt comfortable leaving his children with her alone in South Carolina. And he did that because he knew her, and he saw her, and he saw that relationship she had with Gannon, and he felt comfortable based upon what he had seen with her. And he felt comfortable enough that when this was going on, he felt comfortable enough to leave to go to Oklahoma. Because what he had seen and what this photo shows is they had a loving relationship together until the evidence shows that she had a psychotic break. That something, mental illness from her past, got triggered, and there's a temporary period of psychosis. That's the only rational explanation that had been presented. And there's nothing else they can come up with as far as motive. Ladies and gentlemen, does it make sense that she may have Google searched maybe moving to Florida? Yeah. People have problems in marriages. Do people fantasize some about getting out by Googling stuff? But how would brutally murdering Gannon, how would stabbing him 18 different times facilitate that move? It wasn't. There's no rational basis behind the murder other than psychosis. The fact that she may have years before at some point in time done one Google search out of 1,000 saying, I don't like my stepson. That's not what I see there in that picture. That's not what I see there going on in the days leading up to this horrible tragedy. What it does seem to indicate, ladies and gentlemen, if we start looking at this time frame, looking at the reliable evidence that we have in front of us, is that somehow that fire set off some type of trigger. Maybe some type of trigger that had been disassociated long ago. But we have her starting meltdown. Meltdown right after this fire. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Lewis used the term wacky a lot. Maybe not the most scientific term, but when something seems irrational, when something doesn't seem to make sense, we have to consider mental illness. We have to consider possible psychosis. I would say that video that you heard up there, listen to the tenor of her voice. Listen to what she is saying. She says, I'm freaked out. And when you listen to her voice, she is freaked out. And she's saying irrational stuff like, we're going to have to sell the sofa. Stuff like that to Gannon. That makes no sense there whatsoever. And then importantly, ladies and gentlemen, we also see mania starting to settle in when we start looking at these timelines specifically. Up there, they're texting back and forth. 10:15, Harley comes home. 10:24, 11:30, she's still talking to Al. .248, she's texting Al. 4:36, texting the school saying that her stepfather passed away. Her stepfather who had abused her was not, and you heard it from Dr. Torres at the state hospital, they are not doubting or disputing the abuse that she suffered growing up. And that from Dr. Torres, who had investigated this, who had medical record provided, who had family members provided, who interviewed other family members, and she says the state hospital is not disputing the horrible trauma that she grew up with. And the person who she had suffered that horrible trauma from, that's who she calls and says dies at 4:36 in the morning. What is more important by this, ladies and gentlemen, important to look at, what is also that we see, what is she not doing? She's not sleeping. She is manic at this point in time. She is texting throughout the night, 2:48, 4:36, 4:36 again, 5:03, 5:49, 7:32. She is up the entire night and not sleeping. There is something going on with her head that is not seeming right. There's stuff going on through the day. The text messages back and forth. Harley leaves for work. Other conversations going on. And then they leave, they go up to Petco. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Young has tried to insinuate that all of this was some type of big preconceived plan, that she had made some decision earlier on at that point in time that she was going to kill Gannon. Ladies and gentlemen, does that make any sense? If she had decided at that point, early in the day, when everybody else leaves, Harley's left for work, she's just there alone with Gannon by herself, if there was a decision that was made that for some reason they cannot explain that she was going to brutally murder him, why is she taking him in the car and going up to Petco to buy Valentine's Day outfits for the dogs? That makes absolutely no sense why she would push back a timeline to just an hour or so before Lena got home, for some reason, unbeknownst to anybody, commit this brutally horrific act. Mr. Young tried to comment a lot about the hydrocodone. Be very careful when they try to put facts in their opinion or what they would like them to be that was not provided by any of the witness testimony. Dr. Ignacio testified that there was hydrocodone in his system. She never made any assertions about how much, whether it was a dangerous level, whether it was inappropriate, whether it would have been affecting him whatsoever that way. All she said is, this was a tox screen, this came back. That's Mr. Young's opinion that somehow this was an overdose of hydrocodone, but there was no evidence of that by their expert. And there is no basis that would be for a brutal, horrible attack on a young 11-year-old boy that she'd just been hiking with up there 24 hours earlier. Something is going on in her mind. Something is there losing it. And something horrible occurs in the basement where there is a brutal, brutal attack. The brutality of the attack, ladies and gentlemen, I would say is the strongest evidence in this entire case of a psychotic break. That type of violence wouldn't be needed to kill an 11-year-old boy. Gannon weighed 80, 85 pounds, an 11-year-old kid, not the biggest 11-year-old kid, not the strongest 11-year-old kid, fun, nice kid, what do we know about him? He likes to play a lot of video games, but not needing this type of brutal, horrific rage to kill him. And there is no other, again, explanation other than the psychotic break. Lena then comes home, and ladies and gentlemen, look on that video. Lena wasn't pushed outside. Lena wasn't allowed. Lena came in the house. She's in that house for about 10, 15 minutes, and then she goes out and gets on her bike and leaves. The idea that Lena was never allowed in the house is a fantasy that is not supported by the evidence, that is not supported by any of the videos. Okay, that is Mr. Young's opinion. But look at that video. You see her going into the house. You then see about an hour later, Harley come into the house. And we know that Harley came in the house, and Harley actually went down in the basement. Why do we know that? Because she changes out of her uniform before going to the dollar store. So there is nothing in there that these kids were kept out of this house, and there is nothing to indicate that this was pre-planned that would keep this type of information away from them. What is going on in her head? We don't know. But here's the important thing, and here's what Mr. Young is trying to do. He is trying to introduce antisocial personality disorder into this. Because I would state to you, ladies and gentlemen, there are only two things that account for her actions at this point in time for the remainder of this day and the days preceding is either disassociation, where she has put that memory of this brutal attack of what she did to Gannon someplace that she doesn't have access to, and she doesn't understand what's going on or where Gannon is or what she had done to him, or antisocial personality disorder, that she's some type of psychopath. Mr. Young, remember back to Dr. Torres, tried to interject many times with Dr. Torres the possibility of antisocial personality disorder, and Dr. Torres was firm. No, she does not meet the criteria for antisocial personality disorder. One, there's no past criminality with her. That's an element that you need for antisocial personality disorder. Other people with antisocial personality are unempathetic to people and don't care about people. Again, for her entire career, she was a special needs teacher, teaching kids, helping kids who have disabilities. Through her whole life, that had been her career. That is not a psychopath with antisocial personality disorder. That it could be somebody with a dissociative disorder, either DID or borderline personality disorder with dissociative features, who has kept horrible trauma in her past behind her and is trying to make the lives of kids with special needs better for them. That is somebody with empathy who does that whole thing. Ladies and gentlemen, I would put before you the strongest evidence of disassociation going on here. Look at the body-worn camera of the sheriffs when they come in that night looking for Gannon. The most horrible, brutal attack has happened before there. Gannon is in the house in the suitcase. It has all been recently covered up. She's there with her daughter. She's there with Lena. And she's acting and presenting herself to these police, laughing, joking, being incredibly friendly just after this has happened. Because at that point in time, she has disassociated the horrible act that she has committed. There is no other logical explanation for how that she is doing that. And when you go back and look at these timelines, ladies and gentlemen, look and go through them, what is really important during this whole time, he is not sleeping at all. For the whole time here that this is all going on, you see activity going on her phone or things that she's doing all through the night. She is in a manic situation and her mind is not working. Again, we heard Dr. Lewis talk about irrational things that she is doing that doesn't make any sense. Ladies and gentlemen, it makes no sense for somebody who is pre-planned for whatever reason, whatever motive, to brutally kill Gannon, to then report him missing right away, and then in a matter of 3 days later, go into the police with a completely illogical, incoherent story. You've heard different witnesses. Ms. Stauch was an intelligent, above average intelligence woman, a smart woman, everything like that. To go in only 2 days later and sit down with the police and come up with the ridiculous story of Eduardo is not the actions of a sane, rational person. It is irrational belief. Even children know. If you keep saying different stories, you're not going to be believed. Even looking back at the little boy who cried wolf, which we teach children, if you keep making up things, then you're not going to believe. She changes her story, not only completely different, not only with no explanation as to really why she had made up the prior story to one that she is changing now, but comes up with this ridiculous thing that she met this Eduardo, that he was just going to come over and fix the carpet for free. She's not even planning on paying him. That somehow he is in the garage when they get there, that he then takes her down into the basement and rapes her for an hour, and that he takes Gannon in a suitcase and leads out of the home. That are not the actions of somebody who is sane and logical. That is completely irrational to believe that that kind of thing could possibly be believed. Her actions, I would say, continue to be irrational. She keeps changing her story. She keeps giving different accounts. Gannon is placed in the suitcase, driven all the way to Florida. She goes through Louisiana. She goes through all kinds of East Texas, all kinds of places where people are not around, deserted areas, long areas of desolation, many places where that suitcase could have been hidden and never been found. And she goes all the way to Pensacola for it and drops it off in a dry space under a bridge right near a major city. That's not the actions of somebody who is rational, who is trying to hide that away. She then goes to South Carolina, and you can look at the Google searches that she performs in South Carolina. Face transplant near me. Like she's Googling for a McDonald's or a restaurant that's very close to her. That she's going to pop up, that she's going to go over there and get an entire face plant to change the way she looks. Those are not the actions of a sane and rational person. Those are the actions of somebody that is delusional. Ladies and gentlemen, I would say all of these pretext phone calls with Al are the actions of somebody who is delusional. Listen, go back and listen. Listen to those February 14th phone calls between her and Al. Listen to how her voice and tenor changes between phone calls. Listen to how her emotions switch rapidly during the phone calls with Al, and her stories switch rapidly that no sane, rational person of overintelligence could possibly expect anybody to believe. She is freaking out, and she is delusional in the thought that anybody is going to believe all the different variations that she's trying to sell them. None of that is rational. None of that makes sense. And so again, what then we're brought back to is why. What was going on? What preceded this? And looking, it's going to end up in the mental health experts. And I want to talk a little bit about Dr. Lewis. She is 85 years old. She has been doing research, treating, evaluating people with serious mental illness for over 60 years. She is one of the foremost experts in the country on dissociative identity disorder. She has been published in peer-reviewed journals well over 100 times. Things that educates other psychiatrists and things that educates other doctors, she has authored and produced. She has done, she has the HBO documentary. They don't go just to quacks to do an HBO documentary. They went and they did a documentary on her because she was groundbreaking in her field. Has she consulted on other stuff with Robert De Niro and so forth? Yes. Not because she's a quack, because she has explored and she knows more about this subject than almost anybody else in the country. Has she, in her age, some of the details, the minute things in the discovery get lost a little bit in her memory? They do. And you saw that up on the stand when she was testifying. I'm not disputing that. But what she has is the decades and decades of experience with this, the decades and decades of dealing with people with severe mental illness who commit heinous acts. She has that experience to rely upon, and she had 14 hours of interviews with Ms. Stauch to talk with her, to base her opinion. She had notes from family members, other types of things to show this, and in her expert opinion, is legally insane. She wanted the EEG and the MRI to possibly know if there was also organic brain damage going on here. There's some type of brain trauma that was contributing to the mental illness of Ms. Stauch. What you heard at the end is she did not need those type of things to make the diagnosis of dissociative identity disorder, which she was confident on and she believes upon. Ladies and gentlemen, I would ask you, do not discount her decades of experience. Do not discount her expertise, okay? The acting that, a woman who has pioneered this, a woman who has made her life on this, a woman who has been peer-reviewed over hundreds of times in different articles on this subject, is willing to throw that all away to come down here at a substantially reduced fee to testify is ludicrous and it's insulting. They pay their experts just the same as we do, okay? Then that's why I asked their blood spatter expert, his fees. It wasn't acting like there was anything wrong with that. It's just to show both sides hire experts, both sides pay experts. Just because the expert isn't getting paid doesn't mean that they are money-grubbing liars, okay? Experts in this type of thing, to come and testify, they charge money, they charge a fee. She actually reduced her normal fee to come down and to help with Ms. Stauch and to do this evaluation. And what did she tell you, ladies and gentlemen? Ms. Stauch, of all the hundreds and hundreds of different mentally ill people that she has ever dealt with, is one of the most mentally ill persons that she's ever dealt with. And what else is she saying? I think this is key. Pay very close attention. She's not endorsing that it was definitely Maria that did this. She's not endorsing how Maria is saying this happened. What is she saying? Ms. Stauch has, in her opinion, more than likely disassociated the memory of the homicide because she can't bear to deal with it. That was actually a very good question by Mr. Young on it, and I think there's a lot of validity to that. Ms. Stauch accepting the idea that she committed this brutal, horrible homicide in the manner that was done, smashing that 11-year-old's head in, cannot deal with it. To accept that fact in her mind would crush her, would crush her soul, would crush her identity. And so she has come up with all of these delusional fantasies, trying to come up with some other thing that may have happened. And listen to her voice, listen to the tenor when she's describing that. When she's hoping, when she's talking to Dr. Lewis, I can't remember if it's Dr. Lewis or Dr. Torres, about the different versions she's given, that she was coming up into her mind, hoping and believing it was somebody other than her who did this. The facts, ladies, and we're not disputing that, ladies and gentlemen, it was her. But she was not in her right mind when she did it. And you heard Dr. Lewis state that. and you can look at the evidence, and you can look at the other things that go around to realize that is the only reasonable, rational conclusion as to how this horrible thing happened was a psychotic break. Dakota Lowry, who when he finally realized that his older half-sister actually did this, the first thing that came into his mind, based upon what he knew of his half-sister, was there had to be some type of psychotic break that had happened. That there could be no other explanation as to why it did it, and those are people that knew her and that have grown up with her. I also want to talk a lot, or some, about Dr. Torres. And it is what is important, ladies and gentlemen, to know with both Dr. Torres, Dr. Gray, and Dr. Grimmett is none of the experts that you have heard from that did any type of evaluation think that there's no mental illness going on here. Okay? They all agree there's some type of mental illness. They just disagree over what to call that mental illness. We have Grimmett and Torres and Gray diagnosing her with borderline personality disorder, which is a significant mental illness, which, as you said, comes from right on the border between full-blown psychosis and a neurosis. Okay, it's the most serious of all the personality disorder, and it's so serious because there are such prominent features of psychosis that go along with it. Psychosis where people hallucinate, psychosis where people become delusional, psychosis where people stop becoming irrational. All of that stuff can come and go in people with borderline personality disorder. And it comes and goes according to DSM-5, according to Dr. Torres, according to Dr. Grimmett, when people with borderline personality disorder start to experience high stress. That is why Dr. Niederhauser was important. It was not because Dr. Niederhauser made any type of diagnosis or anything with that, but she came to Dr. Niederhauser because he was experiencing high stress and high anxiety that was causing her be unable to perform at work. The stress and all of that was mounting. You can look at her Google searches. The Google searches leading up to this. For whatever reason, her stress in life was becoming overwhelming. She felt underappreciated. She felt like running away. She felt like leaving. She felt like this was all too much on her plate, that there was nobody there to help her. And you heard from Dr. Torres about how people with borderline personality disorder feel stress much different than everybody else. Things that would not be normal stressors for all of us can become extremely stressful for somebody with borderline personality disorder. And the other thing that was important that Dr. Torres, we talked about quite a bit, is that it is a lot of the same things, the same type of horrible childhood trauma, the type of trauma where you have one parent who is molesting you and another parent who won't do a damn thing about it, that can cause either dissociative identity disorder or borderline personality disorder. They both come from the exact same environment that Dr. Torres said Ms. Stauch grew up in. That type of environment is what can cause people to have borderline personality disorder, which then under periods of stress and anxiety can become psychotic. And I think one of the other things, and I think is something to look in, and something I want you guys to think about when you go back in that jury room, is something that Dakota Lowry said at the end. We don't know exactly all the intricacies of the trauma, of the abuse that Ms. Stauch suffered. We don't. Some of that she knows about, some of that she's come to remember, some of that is locked away, some of that is hidden by other family members who don't want to admit it. But what did Dakota talk about when he was a kid and after his stepdad has died and his mom had moved on to another abusive alcoholic in the home, and Ms. Stauch would come visit him? What would she do? She would leave him with knives to protect himself from something or someone. And the fact you can draw that Ms. Stauch sometimes as a kid going through that trauma either had to protect herself with some knives or fantasized about having a knife to protect her. And then you have the connection between Gannon being stabbed 18 times with a knife. Some of these things are hidden. Some of these things are hard to look at, but there is that association there between what we can assume was some of the childhood trauma that Ms. Stauch suffered, how she dealt with it, and how this horrible thing happened to Gannon. And I understand that Dr. Torres didn't think she was insane, but you can't discount the fact that Dr. Torres readily admitted borderline personality disorder can be a serious mental illness. People with borderline personality disorder can suffer psychosis. People with borderline personality can become irrational. People with borderline personality disorder can disassociate things that the whole person cannot deal with. And that disassociation explains all of these crazy cockamamie lies. It is a fantasy on Ms. Stauch to try to explain this horrible action that she cannot rectify in her home with. And whether you call it borderline, whether you call it DID, I think Dr. Lewis was correct. That is not necessarily the important thing. What the important thing is look at the facts overall and realize this must have been some type of psychotic action going on, because normal people, mentally healthy normal people, don't one day go on a hike, take smiling photos, and the next day stab a kid 18 times for no apparent reason. And no matter how much Mr. Young would like her to be antisocial personality disorder, and he would like that because that takes insanity off the table, none of the evaluators ever have diagnosed her with antisocial personality disorder. None of the diagnoses have even had the rule out antisocial personality disorder. Antisocial personality disorder is something that is always considered at the state hospital, but there are criteria, and she did not meet it. No matter how many times in different ways Mr. Young tried to asked Dr. Torres about it, she was firm and said, no, that is not the diagnosis that we have given her. That's not the diagnosis that Dr. Gray gave her. It's not the diagnosis that Dr. Grimmett gave her, and it's really not the diagnosis that Dr. Lewis gave her. So all the antisocial personality disorder talk is a smokescreen. And when you take the antisocial personality off, the only thing that explains her conduct afterwards is disassociation, is disassociating from the horrible thing that she has done, and she's trying somehow to fix this or to get out of it. The other thing that I want to talk to you, and it's important, that was very apparent with Dr. Torres, Mr. Young would like you to believe that the only time somebody is legal insane if they commit the crime and they just stay there saying, yep, it was me, I did it for these reasons. Dr. Torres and the jury instructions from the court state somebody cannot know right from wrong, but still recognize that their conduct was criminal when it occurred. And so you heard from Dr. Torres, just because somebody in a state of psychosis, in a state of insanity, commits a horrible murder and then tries to cover it up, the covering up of the murder does not preclude insanity. And she talked about how there are cases that she has had where somebody was insane who then tried to cover up the acts that they have done because they didn't want to suffer the criminal repercussions. They are not mutually exclusive. That's not coming from me. That's coming from the instructions that you have from the court. Ladies and gentlemen, you guys have been above and beyond in this. And we are very grateful for the time that you guys have given us, the thought that you guys have put all into this, the sacrifice in your lives that you have made through this long trial. I'm not going to rehash every detail on here. You guys know it. You guys understand it. You guys have heard the experts. You guys can put all this stuff in there together. We are asking you to find her not guilty by reason of insanity. We're not saying set her free. We're not saying let her go. We're not saying don't hold her responsible. We're saying for you to take into account the mental illness that she suffered and send her down to CMHIP, where you see how it is down at CMHIP during those interviews with Dr. Torres, where she's shackled fully, where there's constraints, where it's a locked facility, and that's where Dr. Torres told you if you find her not guilty by reason of insanity, that's where she is going, where there is repercussions, but there is also treatment for the mental illness that she has suffered from her entire life. The other thing that is important, I just want you guys to remember, is the burden of proof. It's not whether you decide, oh, I think that she was psychotic at the time, is have they presented enough evidence before you that you can say, without a doubt, there is no way psychosis was involved here. Have they completely disregarded that? Have they completely wiped it out? And I, ladies and gentlemen, I would put before you with all the different doctors diagnosing with some serious mental health illness, with their witnesses they called diagnosing with a mental illness that has transient periods of psychosis, when psychosis appearing to be the only rational explanation, when no other motive for this horrible thing, with the overkill that was involved here, with the irrational behavior afterwards, even up and through some of these interviews, even up and through some of the trial, all of that points to mental illness. And in no way, shape, or form have they disproven that. And it is their burden. And so if you believe that it is possible that this occurred in a state of psychosis, your legal duty, which you were sworn to do, is to find her not guilty by reason of insanity, and that is what we are asking you to do. Thank you.
Counsel approach, please. Thank you. You may all be seated. Court will recall 20 CR 1358, People versus Letecia Stauch. Record should reflect the jury has returned to the courtroom. At this time, ladies and gentlemen, we will start into the prosecution's rebuttal. Mr. Allen.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen, the only fantasy in this courtroom is that this defendant, this stepmother who killed Gannon, has psychosis, that she was insane on January 27th of 2020. That is the only fantasy that has been brought out into this courtroom. It's been brought out by this defendant. They want to talk to you about motive. We talked to some of you in jury selection about motive. One thing you didn't hear the judge read in any of those instructions is anything about motive. You know why? It's not an element of a single crime under Colorado Code. We don't have to prove motive, and yet we did anyway. This defendant hated Gannon. You know that because she searched it. I hate my stepson. She has one stepson, and she hated him. She was planning to leave Al Stauch, move back to the East Coast. She wanted to hurt Al. She wanted to hurt Landon, for that matter. She did, to the core. They will never recover from what she did to them, ever. And you know that. Think about the time frame that we're talking about. This was no snap in time. This was not an instantaneous thing. This occurred over days. She was planning to leave a week prior to Gannon's death when she killed him. Look at the searches that we talked about on Monday when Kevin Clark took the stand. We know when she was looking to leave. We know she hated Gannon. She knows she wanted out of a marriage with Al. We know that she didn't like what Landon was up to because she would manipulate Gannon about Landon. We know these things because of the evidence that we brought you. And in fact, it does prove motive. I want to ask you about why did Al leave Gannon with the defendant on that weekend? He left on January 25th, Saturday. Remember that? Why would he leave and go to Oklahoma for 2 weeks of training if he knew there was a problem with the defendant? From psychosis. Al told you the answer to that question. He would not have gone. If he had seen some problem with the defendant, he said he would not have gone. And he did anyway, because she doesn't have psychosis. He never saw a single sign from her. What he didn't know, unfortunately, he couldn't see into her heart. He couldn't see the hatred that she had for Gannon, the motive that she had to leave and to hurt him to the core. He didn't know that it was all about her, even though he'd lived with her for some number of years. Defense wants you to speculate that the fire set off some sort of a trigger. You read those instructions or while the judge was reading them to you. It says speculation. Can't do it. And yet they're inviting you to speculate. Why is that? Why would they invite you to speculate when we're talking about an 11-year-old boy who was brutally murdered? Why would they invite you to speculate? Because they want you to ignore the evidence that was brought into this courtroom. They want you to ignore this evidence and speculate on the other hand. You can't do it. Saying she's freaked out in that phone call. Acting she's freaked out. We all get freaked out sometimes. As Mr. Young said, we're human. Go drive down the highway and you see an accident, you might freak out, you might have some rush of adrenaline, and it kind of messes you up a little bit. That's human. Not psychosis. And further, that freaking out that she's supposedly doing is her acting. It's not psychosis. It's all about Letecia. It's all about this woman who murdered Gannon throughout the whole thing. The text to the school, to Leslie Hicks, that morning, January 27th. They want you to speculate again that that's some sort of a trigger. You know what it is. It's an unassailable excuse. You tell your employer that your stepfather, a member of your family, has just died in a tragic car accident. No employer is going to make you come into work that day. She needed an unassailable excuse to not go to work because she knew what was happening later that day. He knew Gannon was done that day. That's why she calls Gannon into school later, or out of school later. The timelines that we brought to you on Monday, her internet searches tell you everything you need to know about her mental condition. She was calculating, manipulating, lying to everyone. Why? Because it's about her, not about Gannon. Deflect the blame and make herself the victim. Does it ever make sense when somebody kills another person? Can it ever truly make sense? Can it ever truly make sense when a parent kills a child? The answer to that is no. None of us in this courtroom, except one, has killed a child. That doesn't make it a psychotic act. That doesn't mean somebody's insane. Unfortunately, way too many people kill kids in this country. Why do they do it? Who knows? But it's not psychosis when this one did it. Be very careful when people introduce facts. Mr. Tellini got up here and wanted to introduce facts to you. Inviting you to speculate. Be very careful about that. He tries to brush away the effect of the hydrocodone that was found in Gannon's system. First of all, Gannon should not have had hydrocodone in his system. Dr. Ignacio told you about that. It's not typically given to 11-year-old little boys. Why not? It's an opioid. It can cause people to get sluggish, lethargic, and lead to coma, and stop you from breathing, and can kill you. All of those things that hydrocodone, an opioid, can do to you, this woman did to Gannon. Why? Because she wanted to kill him. Mr. Tellini brought up the idea that the brutality itself proves psychosis. Is that true? Does the brutality itself prove psychosis from this defendant? The evidence has the answer for you. The defendant's own actions has the answer for you. The brutality of it speaks to the abject hatred she had for Gannon and the pure determination she had to kill Gannon. This didn't start in one snap moment. When did this start? Sunday night. Sunday night with the candle. A candle incident that makes no sense, according to the way that she describes it to people, because she wants to make it Gannon's fault. Does that make sense? Mr. Stauch told you the answer to that question. Harley told you the answer to that question. Gannon didn't play with fire. He would never go downstairs and just light candles randomly. He had a long history of having stomach issues, where he'd get backed up and then have issues with it. And yet this day, he poops himself, and so he's got to go burn a candle to mask the smell, even though he'd never done it any other time in his entire life. Does that make sense? Or does it make more sense that this defendant burnt him? That's the start of the attack, ladies and gentlemen. Sunday night. And it continues with the hydrocodone, a prescription for a full-grown man, is given to Gannon. That goes into the morning time. That's why he's lethargic. He can't get out of bed early like he normally would. He's walking slowly to the pickup truck at about 10:15 in the morning when they leave the house, because he's under the influence of hydrocodone. And then she drives him around, leaving him in the car. He's probably passed out in the car. Doesn't make any sense to leave an 11-year-old boy in a car unless there's something wrong, something that she did to him. And this picture from Garden of the Gods, these two pictures that she sends Al Stauch that morning of Gannon in bed. Mr. Tellini again is inviting you to speculate as to the reason for those pictures, saying she's just a loving stepmother. What are those pictures? Think about that picture from Garden of the Gods in relation to the pictures that she sends Al Stauch. They're proof of life pictures. They're pictures that she is sending out, prove to the world that she had nothing to do with what she's about to do. Why would she send pictures of Gannon in bed to Al Stauch, except for a proof of life picture? A way to cover her tracks, and it starts early, right? They want you to think that this was some sort of a temporary snap. Said it on opening statements when Mr. Cook dramatically walks out of the courtroom, says this is way too worse, we can't handle this, it's a crack in her psychosis, and then we hear it again today from Mr. Tellini. First of all, temporary insanity is not what our insanity statute is in the state of Colorado. Look at it. That does not apply here. Second of all, there's not a temporary insanity moment in this case. It starts from Sunday night and goes all the way through Monday evening. Talking about almost 24 hours of horror that Gannon had to suffer at the hands of this defendant. What should have been the safest place in the world for Gannon to be. People who live by stories, by telling tall tales, don't stop. Why would she stop doing that once this case started, if she'd been getting away with it her entire life? Think about the manipulation that she carried out on everybody else in her life. Al told you about the manipulation. Everything this woman did in her life was manipulation to cause chaos, to make her the victim and the focus of everything. Every single thing. Harley. She didn't know how her own father died, because she was lied to by this defendant. Why would she stop lying when the biggest thing that she's ever caused in her life is being drilled into by an investigation that is the biggest El Paso County has ever seen. That involves the FBI. That's who she is. She's a storyteller. Telling fantastic stories is not psychosis. It's who she is. She starts looking up face plant surgery centers. She starts looking up, I need a new social security number. I need a marriage license. I need a replacement passport because El Paso County Sheriff's Office has mine. And she looks up fake polygraph. Why in the world would you need a fake polygraph unless you're covering your tracks? To have some sort of thing that you can anchor a legitimate story to that you didn't have anything to do with this case. Why? Who thinks of that stuff except for people like this? I would venture to guess that not a single one of us in this room ever even knew a fake polygraph website existed before now. I know I didn't. Let's talk a little bit about Dr. Lewis. She might be a world-renowned expert. She's the only expert that they could find to bring in here to tell you that this defendant had dissociative identity disorder. Not a single other doctor that testified here in this courtroom saw a single shred of evidence that she had dissociative identity disorder. Not a single one. And yet this doctor comes in and says she does have it. This doctor comes in and says she does have it, and yet she doesn't even know what the definition of insanity in Colorado is. She starts throwing around words like McNaughton and other things that might apply in other states, and she said sanity could depend on where you are, what state you're in, that kind of thing. Don't you think if she's going to come in and tell you as an expert, this defendant is insane, according to Colorado law, should know what Colorado law is, and she couldn't do it? There were a lot of I assumes, I don't knows, deflections, stories about other cases. Anytime she was pressed to justify her opinion, she couldn't do it. You saw Dr. Torres in contrast to that. She could point to specific things about her evaluation of the defendant. Compare the two. The instructions that you got from the judge are your roadmap for this case. They help you determine what the law is, and you're expected to follow the law, and you apply that law to the facts in the case, to the evidence that's been piling up over the last several weeks. The presumption of innocence absolutely applies in every single criminal case. It applies in this case. Until you are determined that the charges have been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, she has the presumption of innocence. We have the burden of proof. This system doesn't work if you don't hold us to our burden of proof. We expect you to hold us to our burden of proof. We welcome you to hold us to our burden of proof. Mr. Tellini talked about proving it without a doubt. Proving this case without a doubt. You'll never see words like that in any jury instruction in the state of Colorado or in the United States. You don't have to prove cases beyond all doubt. You have to prove things beyond a reasonable doubt. Because this is, after all, a human function. Nobody can ever prove anything 100%. Johnny Cochran, after the O.J. Simpson, or in closing for the O.J. Simpson case.
Your Honor, I'm going to object to the reference of Johnny Cochran and O.J. Simpson.
There's no evidence of it. It's not commenting on evidence.
I'm sorry?
It's not commenting on it. There's no evidence of what Johnny Cochran did at any point in time. So,
I'm actually using it to talk about the burden of proof, Judge.
well, then rephrase it.
Well, I was about to. So in that case, Johnny Cochran said, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit. What he's talking about is our burden of proof. And he was absolutely right. If a case is not proven beyond a reasonable doubt, your jobs as jurors, according to these jury instructions, is to find a defendant not guilty. And we expect you to do that. If we didn't prove the case, then hold us accountable and find her not guilty. But if we did prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt, the jury instructions are also very clear on that. If we have proven the case beyond a reasonable doubt, the jury instructions tell you you should find her guilty. If the crime's fit, you should convict. That's what the jury instructions say. And that's the other side of the coin from Johnny Cochran's comment. If the crimes fit this defendant, convict her. Deliberations are up to you. When you get back into the deliberation room, you get to control how that deliberation goes. The only requirements are that you all have to be together when deliberations are happening. You have to do it in the jury room. But you can take as long as you want, and you can be as fast as you want to come to a conviction or to a decision. Nobody's ever going to second guess you. If you take 2 weeks or 10 minutes, it's up to you. What we do know, what you should know from the evidence, that there's plenty of evidence to find this defendant guilty, based on the evidence. Not from what I say or what Mr. Young says, or find her not guilty because Mr. Tellini and Mr. Cook say so. The evidence guides you. Let's talk about that question of sanity. It says, so diseased or defective in mind to be incapable of distinguishing right from wrong. Can this defendant distinguish right from wrong? The evidence and her actions tell you that she can. Why do all the things she did if she didn't know what she had done was wrong? Or she suffered from a condition of mind caused by mental disease or defect that prevented her from forming a culpable mental state. What is evidence of that culpable mental state? As Mr. Young said, it's in Gannon. It's on Gannon's body. The evidence that Gannon's body provides you, the story that tells about what she did, shows she has the ability and had the ability to form the appropriate culpable mental state. You don't stab an 11-year-old 18 times, 11 of which are on his arms and hands as he's defending himself, unless you intend to kill him. You don't then dispose of that knife that's never recovered and hit him over the head with such viciousness 4 separate times that it cracks his skull open, unless you intend to kill him. And that blunt force object, also never found. And then you don't retrieve a handgun, a 9mm handgun, and squeeze that trigger 3 intentional times, hitting Gannon 1 time, unless you intend to kill Gannon. That's exactly what this defendant did. And that's how you know she could form the appropriate culpable mental state. This woman doesn't have a diseased mind. She has no psychosis. Multiple doctors and longtime family friends and family members answer the question of psychosis for you. This defendant knew then and knows today the difference between right and wrong. Harley said it. Dakota Lowry said it. Al Stauch said it. Every single person that knew her knew she knew the difference between right and wrong. She was of sound mind and formed the culpable mental states required. You learned about dissociative identity disorder from at least 2 different doctors in this case. Extremely rare. Prevalence in society is roughly 1.4%. But most importantly, it's marked by severe behavioral health symptoms that would be noticeable by others. Other people like Harley Hunt, her daughter who lived with her every day of her life. Al Stauch, who was married to her for 5 years. Dakota Lowry, who was her younger brother. These people would have noticed that she had something wrong with her. The forensic nurse examiner, Amanda Van Nest, at the hospital, would have noticed it. This is 2 days after Gannon is murdered, and the defendant fakes that panic attack in the sheriff's office and is taken to the hospital, given the opportunity to be examined for the supposed rape story that she had. And she splits. Amanda Van Ness told you that she's dealt with people with severe mental health disorders. She's told you what happens when she deals with people like that. Called an M1 hold. It's an emergency situation where you put somebody in care for a period of time because they're a danger to themselves or to others. Amanda Van Ness saw no sign that this defendant was anywhere close to justifying an M1 hold on January 29th. Dr. Niederhauser, on the other side of this equation, about a month before Gannon was killed, the last medical professional to see the defendant before Gannon was killed, also familiar with M1 holds, and saw no signs that would justify holding her against her will because she was a danger danger to herself or others. Because she wasn't. She didn't have psychosis. Why blame others? First, it's Gannon's fault, right? He pooped all over himself, started a fire. He's experimenting with drugs. Isn't that convenient that he's experimenting with drugs? He's curious about bath salts. And there's a Swisher Sweet planted in his backpack. And he's got hydrocodone in his system. Isn't that convenient? Isn't that convenient concoction from this defendant? Then she says he went to a friend's house and didn't come home. Or is it because he loved his mom too much? He was a mama's boy. Is that the source of her hatred for Gannon? She knew she could never replace the love that Gannon had for Landon. And she concocts Eduardo, some random Mexican guy that works at the housing development. Just gives him access to the house through the garage code. He comes in, fixes the carpet, but in addition to fixing the carpet, he rapes her. Bangs her head on the floor, no sign of injury on her. Curiously asked for boxes in a suitcase. Why'd she have to introduce the suitcase? Had to explain away why Gannon was going to be found in the suitcase she put him in. A suitcase that Al Stauch recognized when he was shown the picture. A suitcase that Dakota Lowry recognized this defendant struggling with before she drives off to Florida. We had to explain it away. Next, it's Quincy Brown's fault. You heard Special Agent Jonathan Grusing. He talked about he wishes he would have pushed her more on the Quincy Brown and let her expand on that character. Because this is the character she gave the most information about. It's a real guy. Guy that was published in the media. The most wanted people in El Paso County for sex offenses. Perfect fall guy for what this woman did. He replaces Eduardo as the rapist. Knew his name when his ID fell out conveniently and landed on the floor in front of her. Then he turns into a guy up in northern El Paso County selling a bike. Or he's laying in the road as they're driving and gets into the car and forces them to come back home and he rapes her there. Or Gannon's test riding a bike, crashes, hits his head, and then he takes off with Gannon. Uncle Matt, the least descriptive person in any story this defendant has probably ever told. Boy, can she tell some stories, can't she? Somehow Gannon knew him and he was involved, but we don't really know how. And then it's the pregnant lady with the cash baby. Supposedly 8 months pregnant, involved with money laundering for Mexican restaurants, gets into the car, starts pulling money out of her belly. Somehow she's involved with what happened again. Pointing outward, right? Pointing any way except for her. Except that in each one of these stories, the blame for Gannon's disappearance is someone else, and she's the victim in every single one of these stories. Figuring out a way to cast blame elsewhere and situate herself as the victim as to what happened. That's a very calculated move. Every single time she does it, she's doing it to explain away why pieces of evidence are found in the case. She knows about the suitcase is going to be found. She notices that we're searching up in northern El Paso, southern Douglas County, where the board is found. So that's when the bike story comes in with Quincy Brown up in that area. She's got to explain away why her GPS is going to show her up in that area. Just up there innocently looking for a bike. But Gannon's blood is going to be found up there. Got to explain it away. Landon's fault. This is the most cruel of all, right? That somehow Landon is responsible for a Gannon because of her ex-husband. That somehow Landon is involved with Gannon ending up in Mexico. Why would she introduce the word Mexico? Because by the time she's saying this, she's already pitched Gannon over that bridge in Florida, thinking it's pitched over into the Escambia River that flows out the bay and into the Gulf of Mexico. It's Al's fault. His fault that Gannon is gone and he should be investigated. Somehow he contaminated the scene. Another cruel twist of the knife. Going after the people that Gannon loved the most and who loved him the most. Shows you the hatred that she had for these people. The hatred that she had for Gannon and how she's going to use Gannon's horrific demise against the people that loved him the most. Her stepfather, James, supposedly sexually assaulted her as a kid. It's his fault that she's the way she is. But there's not a shred of evidence from anybody until she starts raising competency that she ever suffered any sort of ill harm by James. She never reports it to a single person for over 20 years. And yet that's the trigger. Does that make sense? There's a caped invader's fault. It's the last one, right? Standing on top of the bed, wearing a cape, then realizes it's Gannon, but she shoots him and stabs him and does all these other things to cover up for whatever. Does that make any sense? Or is this just another concoction? Another way to point outwards on blame and show herself as the victim? When she realizes those external sources aren't working, Dr. Dorothy Lewis comes into play. Before she looks at a shred of evidence, in February of 2022, she's already said, yeah, you need to go with not guilty by reason of insanity. Dissociative identity disorder is the answer. Doesn't know a single thing about this case or this defendant in February of 2022. And so what does this defendant do but start creating names? There's Taylor, Harmony, Christina, Jasmine, the frisky princess, little Lucia, and Maria Sanchez, Spanish-speaking Russian sniper. Knows how to kill, kill, kill. One thing we do know from this evidence, this defendant knows how to kill. Knows how to kill a defenseless little boy in his bed. There's better words to describe this defendant and what she did. Unreliable. Every person that she's ever interacted with in her life can tell you that she's unreliable, that she tells tall tales. She hated Gannon. You know that because of the injuries that Gannon suffered. You know that she hated Landon and Al. Why take away their little boy the way she did and concoct the story she did unless she hated them just as much as she hated Gannon? She planned this. A week before Gannon goes missing, she's already looking at renting a U-Haul and places to live in Florida. Sometime prior to Gannon's death, she searches, "I hate my stepson." Premeditated this thing. You know that from the proof of life photos. Those two pictures that she sends to Al on the morning of January 27th. She's setting up her excuse. Portraying Gannon as experimenting with drugs when she knows that she's drugging him with hydrocodone. She burned him Sunday night when this all starts. Gannon didn't play with fire. Not going to intentionally burn himself. In that first story about the candle incident, she talks about taking the kids outside and then having to go back downstairs to get Gannon. They all pile in the truck and drive off. That never happened. This was just a story that she had to explain away because the fire didn't work. Gannon didn't die from the fire. Then poisoned him with the hydrocodone. That didn't work. Remember, Gannon was a fighter. 1 pound, 6 ounce little boy when he was born. Overcame all the odds. But he couldn't overcome this one. But he sure did try, didn't he? She attacked him. Stabbing him 18 times. Like I said, most of those are on his arms and hands because he's fighting back. Beat him over the head 4 times with some blunt object that's never found. Cracking his skull like an eggshell. Shot him in the jaw, severing his spine, and likely killing him instantaneously. She then manipulated the heck out of this investigation with her stories. Her stories and manipulations of this investigation caused it to be the biggest investigation in El Paso County history. I heard that from several different investigators involved in this case. And it stretched from Colorado Springs all the way to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. She hid Gannon's broken, dead body in a suitcase in that storage room. She ran from cops when the circle was tightening. Remember that trip to Marshall's? When the cops were going there to get cell phones and get the car that belonged to Harley? And they encounter her out in the parking lot. She takes off running. As soon as she sees those guys, she takes off running, throws the keys across the parking lot, starts yelling at Harley, "Don't say anything." Why? If she didn't know she had done something wrong, why? Then fled to Florida, and then eventually South Carolina. Get as far away from this thing as she possibly could. That's why she's wanting to get a replacement passport so she can escape the country. She dumped Gannon's body over the bridge. Mr. Young talked about this. Think about how divine intervention plays a part here. Macon Ponder had been at that bridge a month and a half before then. Gannon's body doesn't get found for at least 2 years, if ever. She murdered Gannon. January 27, 2020. She murdered Gannon. This little boy deserves so much more out of this defendant. He deserved protection. He deserved to live. He deserved to grow up and become a young man and someday have a family of his own. She took it all away.
What is the exact location of the emergency? Well, 667, Linden Drive, Colorado Springs. Please say that one more time, make sure I have it here correctly.
Gannon Stauch was only 11 years old. His life was taken far too soon, but his story continues to be remembered by millions. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy true crime documentaries and real courtroom coverage, consider subscribing for more. Rest in peace, Gannon Stauch. You will never be forgotten.